So I'm sorry to analyze the event of my father passing away again in this project or these PAs, but it's probably the biggest event that's ever happened in my life, so it's really beneficial and good for me to try and break it apart as much as possible, even though it did happen so long ago. So the day it happened was definitely a moment in my life where everything was changed, where my perception of the events that happened, it's hard to explain because it was from a child's point of view, but for me, the whole entire day was trying to understand and organize in my mind what was going on. Again, like I said, I was 7, so I spent most of the day studying other people and other people's reactions, trying to, that way, get something to conform with my reality, to try and understand what was really happening. My mother, told me and my sister that it happened, but for me, I didn't have a way to organize that information because being a 7-year-old, I had never, at least, had to deal with death at all. In part for dealing with like maybe the death of a hamster or some small animal. The moment when I started to understand how serious of a situation it was when I had told my neighbor friend what happened, and she said that we needed to tell her mother. And so when I told her mother that my dad had passed away, and she rushed over to my house, which was only a few houses down, and hugged my mom, and she started crying, and my mother was almost stoic, and I'm guessing in shock of what happened. And for me, just watching all of this happen, I still didn't know what was going on, but at that moment I did understand that it was something serious. The rest of that day entailed sitting around in the living room in silence. People would show up and join the silence, and no one was really saying anything. And for me, that was even more confusing. The days and weeks following what happened, I remember asking a lot of questions. I remember specifically being told that my father would not be coming back, but for me that was like, oh, well, where'd he go? Why isn't he coming back? And the word death it didn't have any meaning for me. There was no spot for it in my mind. Sorry, And through the next weeks, and even maybe up to a year, I recall asking her what happened to Dad, and her saying, remember, I told you he died. And for me, I hadn't remembered. I'd remembered that statement, but I hadn't remembered what it meant. I hadn't remembered that meant he had gone on to some other place, or whatever death may be. But I think that the real struggle for me was not that initial day of him dying, but instead the years that followed. As I progressed and got older and had more mental capacity, it seems that the emotions of that day seemed to come forward more. I remember having triggers that, would set me off, or I remember these two bullies in school had found out that my father had passed away, and them being very cruel about it and not understanding their cruelty. That was more learning for me, the years to come, and understanding how my perception of that day would affect me for the rest of my life, and especially in further relationships and friendships, not only with men but with women, especially my mother. I remember whenever she would leave the house the next 5 or so years after my father passed away, not knowing if she would come back, because that's what I had learned. I had learned that it is a possibility for parents to leave to go skiing and to never come back. I mean, I guess I can say as an adult that it has changed me, because I think I'm more sensitive. I'm a deeply sensitive person, and this moment in my life has created something. For me, my mental representation of reality was that of sadness, maybe. Not initially, but my brain organized all that information I had gathered from him dying, from watching people grieve, I'm sure I underwent some type of small grieving as a child. I know I did later, but it organized all that information to feel sadness, to what was my knowledge of needing to feel sad, because I watched everyone else feel sad. It is interesting to see how my sister and I have organized this information differently. For me, afterwards, I internalized. I was quiet. I read a lot. I started running at a young age, which served as an outlet for me, through junior high and high school track, that kind of thing. And for her, it was all externalized. She had a lot of piercings, was very physically harmful to herself, drinking, smoking, whatever, drugs. She sexually acted out, I guess is the term to use. So she maybe had a harder time processing the information than I did. I've spent all these years trying to figure out how we're so different, and honestly, maybe that 1 year difference, she's a year younger than me, gave me the advantage to greater comprehend and take in and remember what happened, as where she says that she remembers none of it. And I couldn't understand it for the longest time, why she acted the way she did and why she was so hurtful. But it probably comes down to her lack of being able to perceive and organize and have any kind of reasonable emotion about what had happened to her and our family.